Yeah, I mean, I've said it for weeks and weeks. It's not a very good football team, and I give them credit for overachieving a little bit at the beginning of the season. But you saw the dearth of talent, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, Drew Brees can get rolling. We all know that. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. But when you give up 7 passing touchdowns, that's ludicrous. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the two defensive coordinators in that game, Rob Ryan, obviously on the Saints side, Steve Spagnuolo on the Giants side, who Ryan replaced in New Orleans. They're not very good these days. And you kind of saw it, and it blew up. And he had this game with 101 points, and the Giants came out on the short end. It's going to be difficult for them every week. They're not very good. So they have to find a different way to win, whether it's Eli Manning getting hot, whether it's turning the football over. And I just don't believe in the New York Giants.
Well, okay, so the Giants lose to the Saints by giving up 52, 53 points yesterday. You had the Cowboys have already lost to the Saints. The Eagles beat the Saints. So there's an interesting dichotomy there where, hey, you look at that, okay? This is a Saints team that I guess is mediocre, but they're starting to play better football. But those two teams had big-time problems stopping the Saints. The Eagles' defense dominated the Saints' offense. Are we starting to get a little bit of a clue, though, that the Eagles' defense might be the separator between some of these teams?
Yeah, I mean, that's what they were able to hang their hat on. It's been pretty clear in this division, understanding it's a very bad division. The Eagles have the best defense in the NFC East, and I don't think there's any question about that now. We have a large enough sample size to kind of understand it, and everything's there for them. I mean, that's a bye week you dream about when you have the Giants losing such a crushing game as that, where their defense implodes, and obviously the Cowboys fight and claw again to get that one game without Tony Romo, and they can't get it. So it was very, very productive, and everything's in front of the Eagles. They just have to get a few things corrected on offense. It remains to be seen if they do that. But I think you're going to see a pretty consistent performance from that defense the rest of the way because it's a pretty good unit.
Well, that's the one thing I was watching. You know, you have an Arena League game in the 1 o'clock. You had an awful offensive display in the 4 o'clock. And I'm thinking, man, the Eagles played the Saints already, and the Giants can't stop them at all. And we know what's going on with Dallas's offense right now. I mean, just pitiful with Matt Castle at the helm. I think the one thing you got to take out of that bye week is no matter how bad the Eagles consistently look on defense, on offense, they seem to, number one, get their running game has been a little bit better. They've run the ball well the last 3 or 4 weeks in a row. And defensively, they have an opportunistic defense that even when their offense is struggling a little bit, gives them the opportunity to score some points. And that's why I think coming out of that bye, you got to feel just a little bit better if winning the division matters to you.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your expectations. We've talked about that. If you truly thought this team was a Super Bowl contender before the season, you're going to be disappointed. If you're just worried about making the postseason, it's very much within reach. And I would say, you know, if you took the temperature today, again, the Eagles look like the best team in the NFC East. Now that, you know, is the tallest short person at the circus, but whatever. It is what it is. You're going to get in if you win the division. And right now, the other teams have such issues. It's right there for Philadelphia to seize control and even create a little separation as we go further into the season.
Yeah, interesting 4-week stretch. They got Dallas on Sunday night. They can put a hurt on the Cowboys there. Then that Miami, Tampa Bay, Detroit. I think the combined records here are like 9-23 or 9-20-something, somewhere in that range. I figured it out this morning for the article that I wrote. But this is a spot where the Eagles, coming off a bye, can start to gain a little bit momentum. What did you see from Dallas yesterday that makes you feel like this team is either A, ready to turn a corner, or B, is starting to they've lost 5 in a row. They can't score. But have they done anything that make you feel like, hey, they got this going on if they can just do this? Because I saw yesterday a team that it didn't matter that Dez Bryant was back. They can't do anything on offense.
No, they can. And the one thing you have to hang your hat on for as much, you saw Greg Hardy, for as much as people dislike him as a person, and rightfully so, he's a hell of a football player. And you kind of saw that yesterday. So they're getting healthier on defense, and that's a pretty good unit. So if they can maybe get a touchdown here or there, I guess you could spin it like that part is going in the right direction. But, you know, they're suffering the same fate that Green Bay had a couple years ago when Aaron Rodgers went down with the exact same injury. In fact, Tony Romo is so important to that team. They've gone from a franchise that would have probably won 11 or 12 games and ran away with this division to a team that literally can't win every single week. That's how important he is to that football team. And until he gets back, it's going to be a Herculean struggle for the Dallas Cowboys.
Does getting Dez Bryant back give them a shot over the next couple of weeks, or does it matter because of the quarterback?
Well, I think it would help if he was healthy. He's clearly not healthy. They rushed him back. He can't run certain patterns. We talked about a Jones fracture and the normal time it takes to heal. Remember, it's a broken bone. There's only so much you can do. There's a certain level of time a broken bone needs to heal, and it doesn't matter if you think you're Superman and injecting stem cells and sleeping in hyperbaric chambers. The bone has to heal, and I think it was a very short-sighted thing for Jerry Jones to push him back on the football field. And I think at some point they'll understand that, but that's how the Cowboys do business. They think about the next 15 minutes. They don't think about the next 2 or 3 years.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. The NFC East is a mess. It's up for grabs. Big stretch for the Eagles. You got the Giants, Redskins, and the Cowboys, all of them right in the thick of things. But if Dallas loses and falls to 2-6 next week, they'd still be right in the thick of things. But what is the latest on Romo? I did see a report today that says, he's unlikely to practice, even though he's able to this week. This is the first week that he's allowed to come back and practice, but probably won't. And now it's looking more and more less likely, John, that he could be ready for Week 11 when he's eligible to come off?
Yeah, I said that from day one. I thought that was very optimistic. Same thing as we talked about with Dez. It takes a certain amount of time. And if you go back to the Rodgers injury and you go back to Nick Foles here, people were talking about, well, maybe they can get back by this time. But they weren't. In the case of Rodgers, he was able to make it back in Week 17. Saved Green Bay's season that year by winning the game in Chicago. But if you look at the history of that particular injury, Week 11 was awfully optimistic. And I said it was more likely that it would be out longer than be there Week 11. I think it's really breaking that way.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, Giants have not rolled out Jason Pierre-Paul in week number 9. I don't know if he would have helped them limit the Saints to less than 50 points the other day, but would you be surprised if JPP's back on the field this week?
I'd be very surprised from what the people in New York were saying. They were looking at after their bye week, and if you saw the pictures of his hand, I can't expect anything from him when he does get on the field. So I think that's just a case where the Giants had budgeted money, significant money towards him anyway. They were able to get a much more desirous deal, and they're just rolling the dice and seeing if they can get anything from him. But to count on it, it's just something you can't do, and I'm sure that's the way Tom Coughlin's looking at it. He's not counting on anything from JPP at this point.
John, a couple other NFL notes before we look at your bye week breakdowns on the offensive side of the ball. Let me go to San Francisco. What's going to happen with Kaepernick?
Jim Tomsula came out today and said everything is, under advisement, under the microscope as far as changes, and that includes Colin Kaepernick. He's regressed to the point where it's clearly a mental thing. So I don't think it would be a bad idea to take a step back and have him sit for a week or two. Obviously, Blaine Gabbert is the backup there, so they probably don't have a lot of hope that he could develop into what we once thought he might be. as a high number one pick. But Kaepernick is just mentally shot. And if you saw the one play where they literally had a receiver out to the left who was uncovered, it was a total defensive mistake, and he just didn't see it. He didn't throw the football out there, and nobody was covering the wide receiver. And that's what he's dealing with. There's so many mental hiccups in his game. It's almost you're doing a disservice to the player by not benching.
John, tomorrow you and I will be live at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City. Will we be talking about any significant trades?
I think it's more likely this year than it has been in the past. People get excited about trade deadlines because they think about Major League Baseball or the NBA, but the NFL's never been a plug-and-play league, so you rarely see those big-time trades because you understand if somebody comes in this late in the season, he's likely got to learn a whole new system, whole new language of doing things, and it's just, not desires to succeed. But there's a lot of new blood around this league, and with that new blood and the personnel aspect, Chip Kelly obviously here, Ryan Pace in Chicago has already traded Jared Allen in season. He's traded John Bostic in season. And it looks like Ray Farmer in Cleveland has every veteran he has on the trading block. So this new blood has a different mentality, and they might be more willing to get things done.
Yeah, and obviously you look at teams' quarterbacks, RG3 and Kaepernick, as we talked about before, teams like the Jets who need quarterbacks, even Dallas right now, who there's been some talk. They actually had to put out a report that said they weren't going to play Kellen Moore this week. That tells you where they are in the quarterback situation down there. So it'll be interesting to see if one of these bigger-name quarterbacks, if somebody just gives up on them and elects to move on, or take a shot. As you said, it's hard to plug and play, but we've seen guys get signed off the street and come in, and look, sometimes you just got to simplify it, but I'm really interested to see if we see something stunning tomorrow.
Yeah, and remember Ryan Mallett is on the street now after all his travails in Houston. So
deservingly so.
Yeah, he is, but a team like the Jets is so desperate, that's probably the likely way that they might lean. I don't think RG3 is going to go simply because Daniel Snyder refuses to give that up. And I think the only thing that's going to save Jay Gruden's job is winning that division. I still think it's unlikely, even though I picked Washington last week and who's in, who's out. That was more of a shot at the three other teams that I was so disgusted with. And I think that's really the only way he saves his job. And unless that happens, I think Snyder wants to give RG3 one more chance.
Wow, that's a big guaranteed number if he plays this year, though.
Yeah, it is, but he loves him, and he's never stepped away from that. He built that franchise around him. Jay Gruden kind of sold himself to Daniel Snyder by saying he could fix RG3, and I think he kind of, I don't want to say lied, but he certainly fibbed. Because he obviously didn't want that type of quarterback in his offense. So I've said from the start of that whole thing that it's still more likely that Robert Griffin III is in Washington next year than Jay Gruden.
Wow. All right, let's look at your bye-week breakdowns. Let's start in the backfield. Murray, $40 million. Matthews has been very good. Sproles, who's been the MVP of the running backs?
Well, I think, I did the offensive backfield as a whole. I think Darren Sproles has been the MVP by default. As I said, I don't think anybody really deserves it, but if you look at what a disaster the quarterback and the running back positions have been for the Eagles, Sproles is the one guy who's out there and is real difficult for opposing defenses to deal with. But even he has had, a lot of uncharacteristic drops this year. But he's still been their most effective player and the toughest one to deal with, so I gave it to him by default.
You got Murray struggling, Matthews not a lot of touches, and, of course, as you just mentioned, Sproles, everybody always wants to give him more touches. Which one of those guys has better days to come?
I think DeMarco does because I don't think he's a fit for this offense, certainly, but at the same time, as Chip morphs to what he wants to do, and he finally gets a quarterback who has some movement skills, that'll open up the spacing for DeMarco Murray when you have that threat at the quarterback position to run the football, and that'll just make things so much easier. So I think he's obviously going to be here next year, and I think Chip is going to move on from Sam Bradford, get a quarterback that fits his system better, and I think when that happens, I think DeMarco's got a better chance to at least improve somewhat.
All right, which of these guys, and you mentioned you included the quarterbacks in here as well, so which guys this just not going to be the place for?
It's obviously Sam Bradford, and I think I've said it. I think Chip's already made that decision. I truly believe that. And as I said, I think if he didn't pull the power play, he would have already benched him. In other words, if he didn't make the trade for him and he didn't have skin in the game as far as the acquisition went, I don't think there's any question Mark Sanchez would be the quarterback of this team. And, you know, when Chip is in his quiet moments and self-reflecting, he understands that Sam Bradford's not going to be here next year because he's just not a fit for what he wants to do.
All right, and the biggest disappointment, you got a lot of them to choose from in this backfield. Obviously, Big Price Murray, you got Bradford. Who is it going to be?
Yeah, it's got to be Sam. He's the quarterback, and he was sold to this fan base, as I said, having the accuracy of Aaron Rodgers and at least a little bit more mobility than Nick Foles had. And it's been anything but that. He's been tremendously inconsistent with his ball placement, and he is so immobile that the zone read looks are completely off the table. They don't even call them. They just call running plays, and opposing defenses understand that, and they don't have to respect the quarterback on the mechanics of that play.
John McMullen, we're looking at the bye week breakdowns. This is the offensive side of the ball. Last week we gave you the defense. Let's go over to the line, which has been very up and down, but who's been the MVP of that offensive line so far?
I gave it to Lane Johnson. Jason Peters is still the best player on that line, but he struggled a little bit early, obviously got hurt in Carolina. The one guy who's been there consistently, even when the line was struggling a lot in the first few weeks of the season, was Lane Johnson. And then you add into it the fact that he's playing through a sprained knee, showing off his toughness. He's been so important to that team. He's taken that next step in his career as one of the best right tackles in the NFC. And I still think long-term he's the heir apparent to Peters on the left side. He's going to flip over, and he's got the athleticism to handle that side.
All right, John, also, as you mentioned, this has been a struggling unit, but which of these guys show you something that better days are to come?
I think it was Andrew Gardner. Before he got injured, he was playing really good football, especially as a run blocker. He was their best run blocker when they were struggling to run the football so much early in the season. And I know the narrative was that he wasn't playing well, and that was just untrue. He was. Alan Barber on the other side was the issue. He was the guy really struggling, along with Jason Kelsey in the middle. So those were the guys getting blown up in the run game. Chip Kelly's talked about Gardner's football IQ, his consistency, and he's never going to be great, but I think he's going to be a solid right guard for him, coming back next year.
Better. They signed him to that deal before the season, him and Alan Barber. All right, who's it not going to happen for?
It's not going to happen for Alan Barber. He's just a below-average NFL player. That's not to say he can't be a backup because he's got some versatility. He did that in Green Bay, did it here. And that's the kind of guy you want on game day if something happens and you need somebody to step in for 20 or 30 plays. But when you have to play him as a starter consistently week in and week out, and the opposing defense can game plan knowing he's going to be there, you're going to have it. Can't hold up, and I don't see that changing. He's a veteran guy. He's been around for a long time.
All right, who's been the biggest disappointment on that line? It seems like there's a lot of candidates there, too.
Yeah, the biggest disappointment has to be Jason Kelsey, just because of what was expected of him. And he's played a lot better recently. I think in the most recent Pro Football Focus ratings, he was up to 19th. But if you think about where he was as one of the 2 or 3 best centers in football and how poorly he performed early in the season, it was a head-scratcher. And that's the one I still can't put my finger on. I don't know why his play has regressed to the point it was. And even though he has improved a little bit over the last few weeks, still nowhere near where he was or what was expected.
All right, let's look at the wide receivers and the tight ends. I think this is a very disappointing position as well. Not because, hey, they have guys that should be Calvin Johnson out there or Julio Jones, but you have a first-round pick, you have a second-round pick, what's off a third-round pick or a fourth-round pick at the worst. So they have guys that have been drafted high, hasn't worked out. Ertz is a second-round pick too. So who's been the MVP of the receiving corps?
Again, it's the best of a bad lot. And I went with Zach Ertz because he is a good receiving tight end. But he has issues. Obviously, he's not the greatest blocker in the world. He's not a Jimmy Graham type or Tyler Eifert type, which I think a lot of Philadelphia fans thought they were going to get from Zach Ertz. He's not as athletic as those types of players. But he is solid at what he does. And for this group, which is, I think, the worst overall group on the Philadelphia Eagles, I think he's been the best of a bad lot.
All right, we got a lot of candidates for the better days to come. Obviously, you can pretty much hope that any of them has better days to come because none of them have stood out. But who's the guy?
Well, I think it's Aguilar because he still has, high-level athleticism. He still runs routes pretty well, especially for a rookie. I think he was ahead of the game as far as that goes. He has to add strength. He was getting beaten up at the line of scrimmage. And that's what cornerbacks will do, especially with young receivers. They kind of know they're not strong enough to be in the NFL right off the bat. So he's got to get in the weight room. He's got to get stronger to handle press coverage, and he's got to catch the ball more consistently. But he has the athleticism to be a very good player in this league.
All right. I agree with you. I'm disappointed Aguilar, but I thought he showed enough in the preseason to show that there's something there. Who's it not going to happen for here?
Not going to happen for Josh Huff. He can't run routes. He's the opposite of Aguilar. He's very poor at that. Remember, he was a running back at Oregon that got switched to receiver, so he's not a natural receiver. He's got great speed. He's got all the athleticism similar to Aguilar, but he doesn't do the little things well as a receiver. And to me, he smacks of a guy that you need to manufacture touches for because he's not going to run those consistent routes to get open and get separation. And when you have a guy you have to manufacture touches for, whether it's bubble screens, reverses, things like that, that means they're a specialized player. They're not going to be an impact player or a starter or a guy you can count on to be out there the majority of the time.
All right, last one for you, John. Obviously, your bye-week breakdowns, you can read them in full over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Which of the wide receivers has been the biggest disappointment?
No doubt, Jordan Matthews. He was expected to be the number one receiver of this team. And it depends what you define as a number one. I've always thought that was ludicrous from the beginning because he's a slot guy, and the Eagles don't like to move him out of the slot. And he can't be a number one receiver in this league unless you play outside the numbers. And Jordan Matthews doesn't have the long speed to do that. And then you add in the fact he simply can't catch the football this year. He's been a tremendous disappointment.
Well, of course, we'll have more on the NFL tomorrow. We'll go down a lot of the great storylines after week number 8, and we'll dive into the Eagles and the Cowboys live from the Golden Nugget, where John and I are every Tuesday from 2 to 6. You can see us out there live. And, John, it should be a fun day tomorrow. Who's in, who's out should be very interesting. The NFC might have cleared up a little bit, but still a lot of places in the East and, of course, in the South. We'll get a better picture of that tonight when the Colts take on the Carolina Panthers. If there's a loss by the Colts tonight, we got a tie atop the South in the AFC. Unbelievable.
Yeah, how about the Houston Texans? With all that trouble, tied atop the AFC South.
Who knew? All right, John, we'll see you tomorrow.